The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.
Welcome to Crime and Justice Radio, where we talk all things crime, justice, mayhem, and the courts with expert insiders and legal outcasts. My name is Aida Leisenring, and I'm here with co-host Bruce Barquette. How you doing?
Good evening, Aida. How are you?
Good to see you. Good to hear you.
You see me a lot.
We're going to talk about, what are we going to talk about today, Bruce?
We're going to talk about
Courts,
the virus, vaccines, masks, and several other things, including a little bit later in the show. I want to pick your brain and find out what your most interesting, favorite case, client, happening was. Curious about your career and what it is that you found driving in your professional life. That is something that you recall and always come back to. But first, let's invite some callers, right? So 631-451-1039. 631-451-1039. Feel free to call in. We're going to talk a little bit today about the virus as it relates to the law and courts. So, mandatory vaccines, not. You heard Cuomo today, maybe you did, maybe you didn't, saying he was suggesting, encouraging, requesting, ordering restaurants and sporting events to deny access to non-vaccinated people. Raises some serious questions about
whether you can take your kids to dinner at a restaurant.
Will Mickey D's have to do without the people under 12?
No more Happy Meals.
No more Happy Meals, unhappy meals. But also, how do you verify individuals are vaccinated? Does that mean we all have to get that pass that they're talking about? A card? Is this the new way of doing business? And the ramifications of this are just unbelievable if you think about it. You can't go to restaurants. How about grocery stores? How about drugstores, clothing stores, any essential service that you want? You have to show proof that you've been vaccinated in order to participate in that. Quite something. And it brings us to the question of courts.
No, and that's what I'm interested in. It's what's happening inside courtrooms now. What are the trial protocols in federal and in state court with respect to vaccines, masks, who wears them, when they wear them, jury selection, the defendant, witnesses, and the lawyers. And I'm interested in the psychology behind it because there's a behavioral science, if you will, behind trial strategies that lawyers employ. They call it the practice of law because it's an art form. Sure, there are rules we have to follow and there is case law and interpretation, but a lot of what we do in trials is analyze the psychology behind the juror, behind the witness. We make a presentation with our clients. We try to invite our clients to feel more comfortable at the table so they don't freeze and look scary where really we know that they're scared. And what, if any, the mask wearing has to do, whether or not it's a prejudicial impact. Will jurors hold it against the defendant if he's masked and assume he's unvaccinated?
Well, let's start with the rules. So let's start with state court first. What are the rules in state court?
Well, let me start off with federal, because federal courts, at least here in New York, seem to be more uniform. And what the rule seems to be is that during a trial, and I guess it could depend on the courtroom, is that everyone is in a mask.
Well,
so the lawyers are in a mask, the prosecutors are in masks, the judge is in masks, the jurors are in masks, the defendant is in masks, and when a witness has to testify, they go into a box and then they take off their mask and they put on some, clear face shield, which, by the way, reverberates your voice inside you. It's like an echo chamber in your head. And they testify so you can see their face. And I think in some instances when lawyers talk, they either stay seated at their desks or they can talk into this little box that's also clear and also creates a bizarre echo. It's very sci-fi. I tried it out today. In state court, it varies.
But let's stop the federal court for a second, because the actual rule, at least in the Southern District is, and I think in the Eastern District, so the metropolitan area of New York is, if you're vaccinated anybody in the well, which is where the lawyers work, not the audience, but anyone in the well can go without a mask. If any person in the well is not vaccinated, everyone has to wear a mask. So if you walk into a courtroom and you see all the attorneys and the judge and everyone else without masks, that tells somebody, if you know the rules, that everyone there has been vaccinated. If you see everyone with masks, it tells you one of two things. Either the judge has said, I'm going to force you to wear a mask regardless of your vaccination status, or one person in that well is not vaccinated.
Right, but I think during a trial, because, obviously we go to court, or we used to go to court every single day, and cases are called for discovery and motion practice and decisions, and where are we? When are we going to set a trial date? But when we're on trial and where the optics actually matter is when we're in front of a jury, right? And I want to just describe for you what courtrooms look like, at least the ones I've walked into today. They're not, small, congested, sexy French restaurants in Manhattan. They're actually really large rooms. They're extremely sanitary. They're cleaned constantly.
Federal courts, anyway.
Well, no, state courts as well. Don't say that, Bruce. I have friends in state court that preside over the administrative matters, and they're like, I would eat off my courtroom floor.
100 Center Street. Nobody's eating off at any courtroom floor
it is.
In that building.
You know what? We'll have Judge McGrath on, and he'll tell you exactly what they do and convince you that you can eat a cheeseburger like Hasselhoff or whatever his name was off the floor, but sober. In any case, the jury box, if you will, is now like super separated. So every single seat is about 6 feet apart. And because you can't use all the seats in one single wall, it pours over to the back room. So you're basically suspended in space. You have one table for the prosecution, another table for the defense, and the seats are fairly far apart. The judge is obviously far away, and it's spacious, right? And they have like Purells and cleaning supplies at every table. So anyway, just so you understand what we're actually looking at, state courts, the rules vary. If you're just going to court on a day-to-day basis, yes, you can get like a little green pass if you show proof of vaccination. You don't have to wear a mask inside of the courthouse. But in terms of the trial protocols and the trial rules, I think they vary widely. They vary widely in New York, from judge to judge, from county to county, and certainly from state to state, right? And here's the problem I have, is if a judge says, we're going to conduct a trial, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask, but if you're not, you have to wear a mask. And say you're a lawyer who had previous issues with blood.
You just haven't been vaccinated.
Right. But
for whatever reason.
No. Let me paint a picture for you. Okay. Say you're a lawyer that is in his 50s and he's consulted his doctor and he's had blood clot issues in the past, and they both reasonably decide that it would not be a good idea for him to be vaccinated at this time. But yet he's functional and he has a duty and obligation to the client and he wants to go forward. He's not the problem with that issue is if he's the only person wearing a mask, that virtue signals to the jury. Could possibly, shouldn't, but it could.
Non-virtue signal, right?
Right. Now, it could say to him, oh my God, he's QAnon. Oh my God, he's a Trump supporter. Oh my God, he's killing us. I mean, on The View, which I never watched, but someone was quoting Joe Behar of The View saying, unvaccinated people need to be hit with threats. Did you just correct me on someone's name?
I did, yeah.
Isn't it Joe? Joy, yeah.
Joy, yes.
Unvaccinated people need to be hit with threats. You're taking away my freedom not to get sick. So people have a visceral reaction, and people make judgments about other people based on whether or not they're wearing a mask. Not everyone does this, but certainly it's something I care about. Well, when it comes to my client, and my client may not be vaccinated, and he may be outed, if you will.
Slow down for a second, because this is the opposite of what it is on the street and in stores, all right? If you're walking around the street and in stores and you're wearing a mask, everybody's saying, oh, they're very careful, they're very cautious, and, good for them. If you're not wearing a mask, people take a look at you and they say, what's the matter with you? You don't care. You endure the wrath of those who believe that masks are important, and it has become a little bit of a political issue. In the courthouse, in the state courts, it's the opposite. Because if you don't wear a mask, that means you have that little pass and you've been vaccinated. If you have a mask on, it means you haven't been vaccinated. So it's the exact opposite kind of signal.
Though I do want to say, a lot of people that have been vaccinated, a lot of lawyers that have been vaccinated still wear a mask inside the courtroom and choose to do so. So you really can't tell. And I guess if I were starting a trial, and first of all, I'm sure I would fight with the judge over the protocols and the rules and so forth.
I'm sure you'd fight with the judge too.
Because having a mask over your client's face during the whole trial is also prejudicial, because it may not be legally prejudicial, but your jury can't see your client's face and his reactions and his demeanor. And that matters. That matters in the practice of law as we know it. Prosecutors prep their witnesses on what to wear, how to act, whether to yell, whether to not yell, whether to curse, whether to not curse. And we prepare our clients to, hopefully sit calmly next to us, and we try to calm them down, right? But everyone observes. We judge books by their cover. We just do. And that's something that we are challenged by as attorneys, but that's part of the game of trial work, right?
But there's multiple problems with the masks in a courtroom on anyone, as far as I'm concerned, at any point in time. We've tried cases together. We've tried cases separately. I've been trying jury trials since 1986, so 35 years, long time. Every single time you try a case, you're looking at the witness, you're looking at the judge, and you're looking at the jurors, trying to gauge everyone's reaction to what's going on.
And I hear in federal court, jurors are being questioned and their masks are on. And I never realized how important your mouth was.
The nonverbal cues from your entire facial
expression. And I always
expression.
thought people's expression were in their eyebrows. But actually, you see like the sarcastic smirk. You see the attitude towards you of the jury. You see the biases. I mean, there's a credibility charge. And by the way, if you have strong opinions or any opinion or creative solutions, or you're, a potential juror going to court one of these days, call in at 631-451-1039, 631-451-1039. You may be called to jury duties, so we really want to know your perspective on this.
We do, and it really is important, I think, for when you're on trial, and an individual's on trial for their freedom, for their life in some respects, and in some cases literally for their life, you want to be able to gauge the entirety of the individual. If you're questioning a juror to decide whether or not to keep that person as a juror or to exclude them, you want to know the whole person. You want to see the whole person. If you're questioning a witness, you want to see that witness's reactions completely, and you want to see the juror's reactions to the witness as well, and you want to see the judge's reactions to the witness and to the proceedings. It's critically important.
And so that's an optics matter issue, right? Because visually you get, and someone could always say, well, are you telling me that you're not going to allow a juror who's blind on the jury? I thought there was protections for People with Disabilities Act. Well, I guarantee you that blind man has more sensitive ears and can read tone better than the other juror. So of course, but we're talking about the general public that serves on a jury.
And you were talking about having a look at Derek Chauvin, which I think everyone saw him. Him sitting there with that blank stare behind that mask was just awful in terms of its presentation.
The mask did him in, Bruce.
Well, it wasn't just the mask, but it was an example of how bad somebody looked. Fair point. It wasn't just the mask.
No, but
it was awful. The person, he looked more menacing behind the mask. It's almost like he was hiding. You don't get to know the person, and you'd be surprised if you sit in a courtroom and you go through a trial for a week or 2 weeks or however long, The jurors get to know the defendant just by looking at them and seeing how they interact. So I think it's very important, and it's a very good point. What are we going to do with this?
Well, hold on. I'm not done.
Go ahead.
So when we select jurors, often prosecutors or defense lawyers will ask the potential jurors, how do you assess credibility? They want to gain that kind of information before they select the juror. And jurors will always undoubtedly say, the expression in their eye, how they carry themselves, what they look like. I mean, among other factors, right? But jurors are ultimately instructed by the court regarding credibility and how they assess credibility. And that is literally their job, right? And the instruction here in New York is there is no particular formula for evaluating the truthfulness and accuracy of another person's statements or testimony. You bring to this process all of your varied experiences. In life, you frequently decide the truthfulness and accuracy of statements made to you by other people. The same factors used to make those decisions should be used in this case when evaluating the testimony.
And that's the charge that the judge gives to every single jury right before they go and deliberate.
And it goes on to say, did the manner in which the witness testified reflect upon the truthfulness of that witness's testimony? But the same is true when you're making an assessment about the defendant and frankly about the lawyers. And we know this from many, many courthouses in New York. For some reason, they always place the prosecution table right next to the jury. And then they put the defense table way far on the other side. And what happens is over time, every day, if you're the prosecutor, you're right next to the jury. They come in and they look at you and they nod and they smile, and the prosecutor smiles at the jury, and they build this kind of rapport, yeah, and it's helpful. And I didn't realize just how helpful it was until I did my first trial where the tables are set up one behind the other. So I actually got to sit next to a jury, and it was great. I mean, I couldn't talk to them. I couldn't smile, flirt.
Reminds me of a story in Buffalo where I was on trial, and the prosecutor always sat in the back table despite he was supposed to sit in the front table as a prosecutor. And he said he liked it better because he got to view the whole courtroom and the defendant. And so I thought, if he wants to do it, I want to do it. So I got there early one day and sat in that chair and wouldn't get up. And the judge came out and said, "What are you guys doing? This is a schoolyard." And he separated us and separated the tables.
So you didn't get to sit next to during Cal Harris. You insisted to the judge that we get the prosecution table, and he was like, "Oh, well, that would never happen." Another
schoolyard
but
fight we had.
But so I want to go over the possible constitutional violations by these new protocols that really are very prejudicial, I think, ultimately to the defense. More than anything is you have a right to an impartial jury. You also have a right to a fair cross-section of your peers. And what I think might be happening is that jurors that aren't vaccinated may not be seated as jurors. And you may want someone, depending on what kind of case you have, what the dynamics are and who the witnesses are. And this is what we do all the time. We assess who our ideal jurors are, and we do that by where they live, what we think their politics might be, how they grew up, how they answer our questions, and it's important. And you're potentially excluding an entire class of our creepy new society from the jury pool, and your client, and you're potentially discriminating based on religion and even racial makeup, right? There's assertions, I don't know if they're true or not, that less people of color
are being vaccinated. They're
right?
not assertions, it's statistics, and I think they are true.
And so all of this is upsetting, and more upsetting is that most people sitting in jail still haven't gotten their day in court.
Yeah, no, that's going to go on for a while until we get back to normal. If we do, I want to take a moment to plug our law firm, if I can, talk about the work that we do. It's Barquette, Epstein, Kieran, Aldea, and LaTurco. You can reach us at www.barquetteepstein.com or at 516-745-1500. We handle all sorts of litigation, even in this era of COVID. So whether you've been charged with a crime, you have a commercial dispute, state or federal, we do a tremendous amount of appellate and post-judgment work. If you've been convicted, it's not done. There's still a fight left to be had. And I'm truly proud of the lawyers that we work with. As you know, that I had a hand in picking almost everybody that works in our firm. And to a person, I am thrilled with who they are and what we do. Very happy about it. So that's it. BarkettEpstein.com. Give us a call. Look us up on the website. We're going to come back in a few minutes. I'm going to ask you that question, which is, what was your most interesting case? What case did you like the best? What client, perhaps? And talk about what it was like to sit in a courtroom and hear verdicts and kind of the inside baseball of lawyers and how much we actually do care about the individuals we represent.
I'm going to ask you the same thing, Bruce, so...
That's okay. I'm okay. I'm okay with it. It really is something I think that people don't realize how much lawyers, especially criminal defense lawyers, care about their clients, care about the results that we get, care about what the verdicts are. We live with it forever. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
Welcome back to Crime and Justice Radio. I am Aida Leisenring, and I'm here with Bruce Barkett. Welcome back.
All right, welcome back. You ready?
What am I ready for, Bruce?
You ready? I want to ask you a couple of questions.
All right, hit me.
Okay, so you've been practicing for a number of years. You've had a number of clients. I've been fortunate enough to see how you interact with them and how much you literally do care about the people that we represent or that you represent. And I'm curious as to... I don't want to say your favorite, but I can't think of another word. So what was your favorite client? What was your favorite experience in criminal defense?
Well, I've definitely had so many, and I have so many clients that I actually adore. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of clients I do not adore.
No client would believe that because you're very good with them. You're excellent with them.
Thank you. However, this is a bizarre way to set it up, but you know how your computer, when it goes off for a minute, sometimes a computer systems show like a landscape or, place in America. And
it's called a screensaver.
But they'll create their own screensavers. So the one that came up today was this beautiful painting, and the theme was luminism, American landscape painting style that's characterized by the effects of light in the landscape. And that's what draws me the most to this kind of work. And we were talking about the psychology behind masks and jurors and what they perceive and what they signal. And that's my favorite thing about the law. And I love meeting new clients and seeing their light, seeing the different beautiful parts that make up who they are, where they came from, and their experience. And often I find myself sitting and listening like an observer, like I'm at a museum looking at a painting I haven't painted, but that I find beautiful or intriguing or stunning, and I'm trying to learn and understand. And that's kind of my favorite part about our practice.
I'll stop you for a second. That's a fascinating insight because what you're saying is the light, the goodness in these individuals, despite what they're charged with and despite what they may have done.
I do, and I can't believe after 16 years and 3 additional years of law school and clinics, nearly 20 years, that I've never lost the serious, honest belief in the good of everyone. And I think that's an okay way to live.
It is.
It's not that, the worst. I'm still a skeptic. I still have to think like a prosecutor. I have to assess whether or not my client is lying or the evidence is, consistent.
Right. You're a few minutes in. Who's your favorite?
Barry Gibbs.
Who? The singer?
No.
Who is it?
The exoneree that was set up by a mafia cop named Louis Ippolito. So he wasn't just my client. I was actually an intern at the Innocence Project in 2005 to 2006, and I was working with Barry Scheck and Vanessa Potkin, and I was assigned to this case of Barry Gibbs, a Jewish guy from Sheepshead Bay that would call every single day. And I always had to take the call. And Barry knew his case, and he would complain, and he would tell me what I needed to do. And we formed a bond without ever seeing one another through our daily phone calls. And what I essentially did is created a timeline about the facts of the case. And what happened is he got convicted of a murder of a prostitute in 1986. She was dumped in the Belt Parkway. A jogger allegedly saw an individual, a white male, take out a black female from the car, put a blanket on her, and he reported the crime, and the police took over. But what had happened is Eppolito drove by. And so now what we know of Eppolito, who's since deceased, and he died in prison because he was convicted of arranging and covering up several murders. He was one of the most decorated police officers in the NYPD with mob ties, who was moonlighting for the mob and covering up murders.
Along with his partner.
Right. So what happened is it wasn't Eppolito's case, but he took over, and it wasn't assigned to him. He just took it over. And we now know that he threatened the life of the only eyewitness and his family's life to pick out Barry Gibbs. And there was it was clearly police misconduct, but ultimately what happened is the Innocence Project got involved, and they tried to find all this forensic evidence that would have DNA on it. And they learned it had been destroyed. And during a separate investigation, DEA agents charged into the home of Eppolito in Las Vegas, because after Eppolito retired, he started acting in films. He was Fat Andy in Goodfellas. He was the guy that told Ray Liotta to go back to his wife, right? Which is unbelievable, because here Barry is in jail. He was in jail for 19 years. And, Goodfellas is out, and the guy that set him up and put him in there is acting in Hollywood. So what happened is the DEA agents went in and found the missing file of Barry Gibbs. And they said to themselves, why in the world, when you've presided over hundreds of homicides and other cases after retirement, would you take this file with you? And the U.S. attorneys, along with the Innocence Project, basically held hands and investigated the case and convinced the district attorney's office in Kings County to overturn it. And I witnessed Barry's exoneration. But the best part was getting to know Barry after. And walking an individual, first of all, Vanessa and I had to go to Kmart to buy him clothes because the press was going to be there, and we didn't want him in his prison clothes. And he wasn't, this humble individual. He said, I want this color. This is my size. He was huge at the time.
Good for him.
So we went to the big and tall section of Kmart. We got him clothes. And then we
walked.
Why
Kmart? He didn't deserve
because
Brooks
I didn't know where else to.
better?
I didn't know Brooks Brother made like a XXX large suit, and it was last minute that we found out he was getting released the next day. So we had this amazing moment. He was exonerated, and after 19 years, his mom died while he was in prison. His father was in a nursing home. It was actually obviously quite sad. It was bittersweet, but the first thing Barry wanted, and he had warned us, was a bubble bath. But not just any bubble bath. He wanted a Vitabath. And Barry was like this. They took it away. I deserve to get it back. I shouldn't have to work for it. I had my life. I had my license. I mean, the next few weeks
Good for him. He's actually right about that.
He's actually right about that. But you don't realize like the hard things. Like he's out of jail. He doesn't have ID. Vanessa and I took him to the DMV. The DMV was like, we don't know, who you are. We had literally a picture of him in the cover of the New York Times. Babies were screaming in line. He's, looking at the baby going, I know how he feels. And the DMV guy, who I think was like intellectually impaired, but totally cognizant of what was going on, said something to the effect of like, I'm really sorry, sir. I understand what you're going through. And he goes, you guys took it away. I deserve to have it back. And he was like, I'm so sorry for your trouble. And we're showing him the picture. But we finally got him a license. Then he wanted a man purse. And the crazy thing was he grew up with good people who end up to become important and successful people. So he had nowhere to live. But his friend owned these art galleries and had all these free nights at the Soho Grand.
Wow.
So Barry went from prison, from Attica, from the federal detention facility, MDC, in Brooklyn, where he was being held while we were waiting to get him out, to the Soho Grand. So I was living in the West Village at the time, and I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and I would go have a drink with Barry at the Soho Grand, and he became a lifelong friend. He became the godfather to Vanessa's first daughter.
Really?
And we celebrated birthdays and exoneration, anniversaries, and he was just so remarkable, so insightful, so honest, and he was just a pure delight. He became a true good friend.
And I recall, unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, and I remember how upset you were when you found out that he died.
Yep, it was heartbreaking, and I am so lucky to have known him. And he shaped my knowledge of the difficulty people endure when they come out of jail, and I really, really wish there was more immediate funding and assistance for people that are exonerated or people that are, redeemed and rehabilitated and coming out of jail.
Either way.
And a lot of them go on to, file civil suits and get millions and millions of dollars, but that can take years. And in the meantime, he went from the Soho Grand to, we worked really hard to get him a nice SRO, but it was still like I forget what it stands for. It's like a small room occupancy, single room occupancy. And he was complaining about it, even though it was like the top one in Manhattan for people without funding. And he kept saying, I'm going from the Soho Grand to the not so grand. But then he ended up getting the settlement he deserved and, got a nice place, had a girlfriend, and got to know his son and his grandchildren, and was just a dear friend to all of us.
That is a great story, and there are lessons in there for us all. People think that somebody gets exonerated, gets out of prison, it's a big party. That's not the way it is.
The first day it is.
First day it is, but then you have to get on with your life.
Oh, and we did draw him a Vitabath. Vanessa and I literally, and by the way, in Barry Scheck's apartment with DEA agents that he kept calling the marshals. They're like, we're not marshals, we're DEA agents.
I'm sure Barry Scheck is thrilled to.
Yeah, no, I shouldn't. I don't know if I was allowed to say that.
Yeah, well, he just did, so that's that. Look, that's wonderful. Those two cops, Caracapo and Eppolito, they really wreaked havoc on a number of people. And you say, what's your favorite client? I'm not sure this is my favorite client, but one of my clients was Sal Scala, who was reputed to be a mafia figure in the Gambino crime family. And his wife's brother, I believe, Edward Leno, was murdered on the Belt Parkway in 1990. Sal and Edward Leno had many things in common, but one of them was they both were reputed to have participated in the murder of
like the murder victim in Barry Gibbs's case, Belt Parkway.
Yes. They participated supposedly in the murder of Castellano outside of Sparks Steakhouse in 1985. And there was a contract on Leno's head, and he was murdered in 1990. I met Sal well after that. And one of the things that Sal said was the cops killed my brother-in-law. He called him his uncle, I think, my brother-in-law. I'm like, come on, Sal. What are you talking about? Because I'm telling you the cop. I said, how do you know? Because he got pulled over. He was shot in the side of the Belt Parkway. He was too smart for that. There's no way he gets shot there unless a cop pulls him over and they shoot him. And several years later, we find out, sure enough, that's exactly what happened.
Was it Eppolito?
Eppolito and Caracapo. They pulled him over and shot him.
Unbelievable.
There's a $65,000 hit on him.
He ended up getting convicted in federal court and sentenced, and he passed away in prison, I think, a couple of years ago. Eppolito.
Yeah, that's it. But it is unbelievable what people go through as they come into prison. And you say you're going to the depth to which you care. People didn't see you; they can't see you. We don't have video yet. One of these days, we'll have a YouTube channel, and we'll have video in here.
No, thank you.
But what it would have shown is you welling up, tearing up a little bit as you spoke about Barry Gibbs. And I know you well enough that you care deeply about all the clients that you represent. And that dedication and emotion transits or transmits to other individuals, transfers to other people as well. So good for you.
So, Bruce, you have a little time to discuss one of your favorite.
Well, people say, who's your favorite client, right? And right away, I've had some clients that have gotten a little bit of press, and I always think to myself, asking who my favorite client is a little bit like asking who my favorite child is, right? Because I don't really have a favorite. I really do love each part or some part of all the people we've represented.
Well, favorites, I don't like the word favorite.
Favorite's not right.
Who's impacted you? What person has impacted you?
I'll tell you, the case to me, there's one case, and I won't mention his name because I don't think he wants me to, but there's a case I tried in 1995 or 1996 that formed me as a lawyer in so many ways because of the depth of the investigation, because of how much I worked on this case. I think I spent 900 hours on the case in 6 months. On just that one case. And if you stop and think about that for a second, that's crazy. Lawyers bill somewhere around 2,000 hours a year on every case.
Is that how you got your under eye circles?
It was one of them, yes. And that individual was charged with attempted murders, a couple of them, out here on Long Island. And he had had some trouble in the city as well. And the story I like telling the best about this, among other things, there's a couple of parts to it, but one is the verdict, right? So the verdict in this case, as in many cases, right, it comes in when you don't least expect it. So the jury had been out for a couple of nights, and the way it worked in those days is the jurors went to a hotel. They were sequestered. So every night at 6 or 7 or 8 o'clock, whenever the judge decided, he said, okay, that's it for the day. Everybody go home. And you know me on trial, especially when the jury's deliberating. You know how
you're so pleasant,
so insane. And the only thing I do is I live for the night when the jurors go home, and I get to go home and have a drink and a cocktail, and I can relax for a few hours because I know a verdict won't come in overnight. And so I'm just sitting there waiting. And it was a Wednesday night, and we bring everybody up because the judge is going to let the jury go home, go to dinner, and then go to the hotel, and I'm going to get to go home. And I'm sitting there with my client and chatting a little bit, and he is a huge man. I mean, physically huge, big, strong, 6'3", 310 pounds of sheer muscle. One of the law secretaries for the judge said he stays in the courtroom because he wants to, not because he has to. Because if he wanted to leave, nobody could stop him. He was that big. And so we're sitting there, and one of the court officers comes over and takes the water pitchers off the table, and he yells, "Hey, where's the water pitcher? Why are you taking the water?" And I went, "Oh my God, there's a verdict." And he said, "How do you know?" I said, "Because when the verdicts come in, they take the water pitchers off so that nobody picks them up and throws them," which has happened before they started doing that. I said, "Okay, we'll get through it. No problem. Let's see what happens. We've got a good appellate issue, so this doesn't go well." And then the judge took the verdict sheet, and there was like 16 or 17 or counts of attempted murder, weapons possessions, robberies, all these crazy counts. And they were on a sheet, and you know from looking at the sheet where the guilty and not guilty is. So the judge takes the verdict sheet, and he reviews it before it gets published by the juror, before it gets announced. So he's taking the pages and flipping them upside down and turning them over. And I can see the check marks. So I lean over and I say, I'm really sorry you got convicted. And he says, "How do you know?" I say, I can see the markings on the verdict sheet. He drops his head. I drop my head. I said, "It's okay. We'll get through it. We have a lot of appellate issues." And you stand up with all the drama that you can imagine, right? Stand up, face the jury, first count of the indictment. How do you find the defendant, guilty or not guilty? And the foreperson says, "Not guilty." Second count of the indictment. How do you find the defendant, guilty or not guilty? Not guilty. And he starts looking at me as they start going through.
You're like, psych.
He's looking at me like, you got to be like 15 counts, one after another. So about 6 or 7 counts in, he leans over and whispers, "Which one counts? Which matters?" I'm like, "What?" He goes, "What you said or what they said?" And I said, "No, what they said." And what had happened is when the judge flipped the page upside down, I didn't realize that the check mark was on the outside instead of the inside of the page because I was looking at it upside down, so I read it wrong. And I literally got it wrong. And at the end of it, when they were done and they acquitted him of everything, he grabbed me and hugged me and kind of swung me back and forth like a rag doll because he was that big and strong. And he said when he went back, another inmate actually at the jail, he went back to the jail. He was being held for something else that we eventually got him exonerated for as well. He went back. They said people were screaming and yelling and chanting and cheering his name because he got acquitted. He was an extremely popular and charismatic figure because of the way he carried himself. I often said his code wasn't necessarily lined up exactly with society's code, but he lived by it. He lived by it. He was true to who he is. He still is to this day. He is a individual that you don't want to mess with for sure, but who is, if he's your friend, he'll have your back to the grave. And I just loved him for that. He was smart. He was strong. He was charismatic. And he spent some time in state prison, and eventually
for another matter.
He got out. We did a whole another long story, but he got out, and he since 2002 or 2003 has never been in trouble again. Has changed his life.
You kept in touch with him. You visited him.
I want to say we're friends, and that's a great thing. And look, this is no offense to anybody. Please, other clients who might be listening, I love your cases. I could tell stories about them as well. Including some people that, ended up getting convicted. One individual I'm thinking of in particular, this woman who got convicted of murder in 2004, that haunts me to this day. It really does. I wish I could go back and redo that and somehow make that come out differently. But that particular individual, really, that case, the amount of work we put in, flew up on a little two-seater plane up to Malone, New York in February. It must have been 20 below in the plane as the doors were shuddering back and forth to interview a witness. Fascinating case, fascinating man, fascinating history. I wish we had more time. I could talk more about it. But I really love doing that one particular case, and I'll never forget it.
Well, here's to many more, and I look forward to being enlightened and...
Yeah,
hopefully,
that's a great perspective.
Get some acquittals.
Well, the light
underway.
The light behind, and people think what we do is darkness and awful and evil and murders and mayhem and so forth.
I see the mother's love. I see the remorse. I see the complicated history. Who am I? Who am I to judge?
And we're the luckiest people on the planet. I've said this about myself. There's one thing in this world that I can do, and I'm reasonably competent in that. I love doing it, and I'm able to earn enough money to keep my kids in school and, our house over our head. See you next week.
Views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.